university students are like the cockroaches of the entrepreneurship world. The reason they succeed is they just can't be killed. All right. Hello, everybody. How many of you guys already have a business, a startup, some sort? Not yet, but hoping to one day. Already did and failed and never going back. So, starting a company is hard, right? I'm going to talk about a couple things tonight. One of them is going to be how to talk to customers. I think it's a super useful skill. But I also want to talk more broadly about just like why bother and different types of startups and what it means for your life and your career. Because obviously the career path of like joining a big well-known company, like that career path is pretty well understood. Whereas the career path of like entrepreneurship, is there even career entrepreneurship? What does it mean? And is it safe? And is it risky? And how do you think about it? And I've been doing startups for 10 years now, kind of like my full-time job. And actually, in some ways, I feel like it's less risky than getting a normal job. Because, you know, like, you never get fired from your own startup. I mean, you go out of business, but it's like, it's a different thing. Like, the economy doesn't really matter, you know? Like, there's always need for innovation and new stuff. And anyway, before I get going, like, you guys are obviously here for a reason. So what are some of the reasons? Like, starting a company is hard, it sucks, it's emotionally draining, it takes a ton of work, it might not work. Like, why bother? What are some of the reasons?
It's fun.
Yeah, it's fun, right? You get to choose what you work on. You get to choose who you're working with, potentially. There's also some very not fun moments, which we can't forget about. What else?
Make a ton of money.
Yeah. Private islands don't buy themselves. You know, like... You know, most careers don't give you bonuses in helicopters. Like one of my buddies, he was like, how's your year going? Oh, he's like, oh, it's been a pretty good year. I gave myself a couple houses as a bonus. I'm like, oh, good. Can I have one? He's like, no. Okay, so money, fun, what else?
Freedom.
Freedom, absolutely. Now, freedom goes both ways. Like, you'll find some people, like if you walk into a cafe or a restaurant, you know, the person who opened it, they might say they opened it for the freedom, for the control over their own life. And now they're stuck there 12, 18 hours a day, you know? Like, how's that freedom now? But interestingly, most of them wouldn't give it back. Like, most of them don't regret that choice. They're like, yeah, I'm stuck here all day, but it's like deeply meaningful. They were maybe anticipating something different, but it's still very purposeful. And other types of businesses, you can actually start and design the entire business around optimizing for freedom. You know, you can design your whole business and career around early retirement, which is, you know, a different idea as well. Anyone like, you want to do a startup just because you really hate your boss? You're sick of making him rich? There's a bunch of reasons. And probably the biggest thing I've learned is that not all ideas are created equal. Some ideas are good for one purpose, but not so good for another. Cafe, super bad for freedom. Like, starting a cafe is not how to get free, but it's like a great way to work with the people you care about and pursue your art or your craft. And the way I think about it now is there's like three big categories of different types of companies, right? And they're based around the motivations that the founder has. You can start something because you're trying to make it huge, impactful. Whether it's huge in terms of money, or whether it's huge in terms of reaching billions of people, or whether it's huge in terms of social impact, it's like if you succeed, you want it to be able to scale tremendously, right? Another one is reliability, and no one talks about this. And it's like, I want to be able to quit my job and work for myself and take care of my family and have a good, non-risky career path under my own control. This does not get talked about in the press, but is definitely just as valid. And like, a lot of people, you know, you're young, certainly for me, you know, I dropped out of grad school because I wanted to start my first company. If you told me a number that didn't start with billion, like I didn't care about it. Like I was like, no, I have to take over the world. Which is kind of crazy because like it's much easier to do that sort of thing once you have a bit of experience and financial stability. So like why not do that then that, you know? Anyway, and then freedom is a different category where this tends to be more younger people who do it, but it could apply to anyone where you're like, I don't really care about the money or the career path, but I want to live my life right now. I want the freedom to travel the world. I want the freedom to pursue my art. And there's a type of company that really optimizes for this goal as well. And it's such an easy mistake to make to look at what's happening in the press and to see what Elon Musk or Steve Jobs was doing and be like, oh yeah, that is a startup. And it's one type of startup, but you got to be aware of the downsides when you make your decisions and you choose your ideas, because you approach them and you handle them very, very differently. Like if you want to set out as a freelancer, it's a small one-person business, but certainly as a business, it might have a revenue curve like the purple. Like day one, you essentially call up all your contacts from your old job and you say, hey, you remember that thing I'm really good at that I used to get paid for? And they're like, yeah. You're like, I will now do that for you if you pay me. They go, oh, that's great, okay. But eventually you run out of time and it flattens out. And you can turn it into a small business if you want, right? You can hire a few more people, you can train them up. But just like the business model itself has a certain limitation, but it's also got an advantage. You get paid quickly, right? There's no upfront costs. If you want to try freelancing, you can find out whether it's going to work or not by next week. It's like super quick to verify. Whereas scalable startups have a totally different behavior. Whether it's a tech startup or whether it's a physical product, you're manufacturing something. Like at first you're just frantically losing money. Like let's say it's a physical product. Okay, well what exactly is it? You need to design it. And then before you can manufacture it, you can go to the Maker Lab, which is brilliant, and make yourself a prototype, but like it's expensive to do the first manufacturing run. It's expensive to set all this stuff up. And you don't yet really know if it's going to work. The same is true of tech. Building a website, okay, it's not that expensive to make the first version, but to make something good that people want to use every day, that takes a lot of time, right? Like I'm a programmer and it takes forever. Like, you go, oh, it's just a website. But yeah, it's like a crappy website takes a weekend to build. A good website takes, years. And apps are even worse. So like you're just losing this money, but then the upside is that if you figure out something that works, you're like, I have figured out the blueprint. Whether it's for the thing you're manufacturing, whether it's for the app, the website you're building, you're like, I understand my customers. I understand how it fits into their life. I've got it right. It's this magic like turning point moment that at some point Airbnb hit and at some point Facebook hit and you go, they like it. My biggest problem now is how do I quickly reach the rest of the world? And you can, and this just goes up indefinitely. Like Facebook's big problem now is they've run out of people. That's what's slowing down their growth. It's like, yeah, we need the world to have more babies so we can keep growing. Which is pretty crazy. And this behavior, the fact that this goes up so far, it makes us do very irrational things for it. And like the strategy used to be you would stand here. This is what they did in the .com era. You would stand here with your MBA and you would look at how exciting this was. And you would look at how scary this was. And you would go, okay, the plan is to spend the money really quickly so we get through the bad stuff and to the good stuff. But the problem is like doing this, it takes a couple years. And it's like trying to jump onto one of those moving Mario platforms. Like you line up your jump and you do it, but the world is moving around you. People started companies that they planned really hard and they raised a lot of money for, hundreds of millions. And then the smartphone happened. And they went, oh, well, that's not fair. Like, how could we have seen that coming? And you couldn't have if you tried to plan everything in advance, right? And this is kind of the crux and the problem and the challenge of scalable startups. Whoops, let me actually come back to that. This is the challenge that we're all dealing with. Like, we want this prize, and like, how do we cope with this situation? I remember when I was like first starting to pay attention to businesses in the first .com, there was at the Super Bowl, the American Super Bowl, American football, people pay $1 million per advertising spot. And it was a big deal this year that all of the advertising spots were being bought by internet companies. It was like, oh, the internet, it turns out that's a thing. And one of them that I'll never forget, it was pets.com. And their thesis was basically that Amazon sells books online. What else can we sell online? Why not pet food, right? Surely books, pet food, basically the same, right? Does anyone want to hazard a guess how much money they spent figuring out that this was not the same? $1 million, 10 million, 50 million? 300 million, which is crazy, right? It's crazy that someone gave it to them, and it's crazy that they lost it all. Like, it does not take that much money to build a website, and it does not take that much money to figure out that people don't like your website. You should be able to do this more cost effectively, I would say. And it comes back to this. It comes to like trying to charge through the dip with a well thought through plan, as opposed to going in there and trying to like to figure your way out as you go. So we'll come back to what to do to solve it, but kind of the criteria of this kind of startup, the scalable startup, this is one of our 3 options. The idea, it's like the industry doesn't really matter, the market doesn't really matter, the product doesn't really matter. What matters is if you get it right, it could grow incredibly fast, incredibly fast. And the way you get paid is you sell the whole thing to someone else and you move on with your life. You're like, look, I have built a new star. You're like, I have built Dropbox. It is now a part of everyone's lives. Like, have it and I will leave. You know, whether you sell it to the public with an IPO or another company. And the lifestyle here, it tends to be just absolutely miserable. Every founder goes into this saying they're going to be different, and it's just impossible. It takes over your life. And the crazy thing here is it doesn't take over your life until you're succeeding. If you're failing, it's easy to go home at 5 o'clock. You go, what's the difference? Another couple hours, I'll deal with it tomorrow. But if it's 5 o'clock and someone calls you and goes, I will give you $2 million if you have this to me by morning, you're like, oh, I am not going home. You know? Like, you've got the florist on speed dial. You're like, send my wife another package. I won't be there for days. It's like, it's when you're succeeding that it really takes over your life. And to do it, like, you have so much potential for growth. And if you succeed, it's so valuable that it makes a ton of sense to forego early profitability in exchange for focusing on growth, right? So you tend to need investors. Otherwise, you're just too slow and you miss the opportunity. Your team is usually super small at the beginning. You might want to be 3 people, 5 people for maybe years while you figure out what this blueprint is. And then when you're like, aha, I figured out the blueprint, suddenly you're 100 people in 3 months. It's like this it's not linear at all. You're growing a cafe or a restaurant, it's like one more person, one more person, one more person. You're growing one of these, it's like 0 people for 2 years, then 50. And if it fails, well, you go, oh, well, that was fun. And you start the next one. And hopefully the fact that you have investors means you've been able to avoid personal liability, right? You've been able to avoid going too far into debt. However, this is not always the case. Like, Pets.com obviously failed at it, and this is the big trap of this type of company. It's like falling too in love with your plan. It's falling too in love with what could be possible. And what all of the modern startup stuff, all of the lean startup and customer development and all this stuff, it's basically built around a really simple observation. It's like, instead of trying to plan it all and then make the jump, could we instead do it one step at a time? Where you're like, hey, there's a really valuable vision here. Like, can we take one step toward it and then look around and figure out where the next step should be? It's like, get new information in a bunch of little steps as opposed to trying to plan the whole thing up front. And all of these tools like MVPs and talking to customers and landing pages and A/B tests and all of this stuff, it's just a way to get information sooner so that you can make a series of small decisions instead of one big decision. This is like, that's the last 10 years of startup theory in a sentence. And one of the observations about it is that, and one of the reasons that big companies have so much difficulty innovating and acting like startups, is that a small company, a new company, is just a fundamentally different creature, and you have very different goals. Later on, if you're trying to, is that me? Like, in the, the way companies acted in the .com was just hilarious, right? They'd go like, I have an idea. I've laminated my business plan. In your plan, you laminated your plan, you raised money, and you bought a fancy office. Because big companies... Can you turn it on again? It was probably... It's on, yeah. Big companies have fancy offices, right? But imagine this scenario. Imagine you're a bunch of university students working out of your living room. There's 3 of you. You sleep on the couch. You eat spaghetti every day. You launch the world's worst startup. You know, it's taken you 6 months. You launch it, you're real excited, you've told all your friends, even your friends don't go and look at your website, just no one cares. You have 0 visitors on your launch day, and you're like, wow, we messed up, real bad. Now, does that kill your company? You've got no revenue, but you also have no expenses. You're a bunch of university students sleeping on a sofa. Like university students are like the cockroaches of the entrepreneurship world. The reason they succeed is they just can't be killed. It's like, you have no more money. Yeah, I honestly don't mind. I got friends, they got sofas, and if my friends kick me out, I'll go to my mom's, and if my mom kicks me out, I'm sure someone will take in a cold, starving kid on the street. Like, it'll be fine, just give me an internet connection. Like, they can keep trying dumb stuff until something works. Like, the cost of making a mistake is extremely low for a university student. Even if it's like publicly embarrassing, people go, who cares? They're a student, they do weird stuff. At least it's not on the drugs, you know? And this gives them a certain freedom to try stuff. It makes their failures very safe and low cost. Now imagine that same situation, but there's 3 of you. You guys have had really successful careers. You're in your late 30s. You quit your job. You took out a bank loan, mortgaged your house. You rented a fancy office. You bought fancy chairs. You plan it out. You hire a couple developers. You hire a PR firm to cover your launch. You launch, and you were close, but it's not quite right. Some people like it, but you missed the mark by a bit. Does that kill your business? Absolutely. Like, you don't get a second chance there. And what's different is not the magnitude of the mistake. What's different is the expenses. What's different is trying to act like a big company. Like, one of the things that makes big companies big is they spend a lot of money. And they can afford to. They have very predictable income, right? Whereas startups do not have that luxury. And this temptation to look big, to look impressive, to try to act like it, what it does is it makes you more fragile. It makes your mistakes, instead of being innocent little blunders, it makes them fatal. They end your company as soon as they happen. And this period that you have at the beginning, when your mistakes are safe, it's such a precious period. Like, when your company's small and you have no expenses, when it's you and a couple co-founders, maybe an intern, and you're just trying stuff, that's the best time. That's when you can do the craziest stuff. This is the reason why big companies can't innovate properly. It's because for them, their mistakes are super expensive. Whereas for startups, their mistakes cost nothing. And another big piece of modern startup theory is being okay with being small. Like, it used to be like a client goes, can I come to your office, have a meeting? You go, I don't have an office. I work in a cafe if I've got money to spend on coffee. Like, that used to be seen as very shameful. But actually, now people are realizing that's an incredible strength, and you don't want to rush through it. So there's these stages to the startup, and the first one might be called the learn stage or the discovery stage. And here you're trying to answer questions like, is this a real problem? Does anybody care at all about what I'm doing? Does a market exist? Does a budget exist? Is it legal? Do customers have a way to fit it into their workflow? And these are questions that you don't really get answered through market research. The best way to answer them is usually just by talking to people one-on-one. And it feels so unbusinesslike to just go and have a conversation. It's like, hey, do you care about this? How do you deal with it? Why does it matter? Tell me more about that. You're not pitching, you're not selling, you're just tell me about your life. How do you guys deal with this issue at the moment? What happened last time it messed up? It feels so unbusinesslike. But that's giving you this foundation of insight, this foundation of understanding. And then you can take that and you jump into this second stage, which is oh, I understand these guys. I understand their lives. I understand their workflows. I understand their behaviors. I understand why they haven't already solved their problems. And so you're I think I know what to give them. I have an idea. I have a gift for them. I have a product. I think this is going to fit into their lives and make their lives better. Because ultimately, no one should buy stuff from a startup. It's incredibly high risk. They should go to the big trustworthy company and buy from them, right? The reason they buy from a startup is because you've done something, or a new company or an individual freelancer or whatever, you're doing something to make their life better in a way which no one else is. You're creating joy, you're removing pain, you're solving that frustration. You're doing it better for them than anyone else can. It's it's a gift, right? It's fit this into your life, I swear it will improve it. And In this stage, the questions are more like, have I chosen the correct features? Is this the correct gift? Have I built it in the right way? Will they actually use it every day? Can I get someone to pay for it, importantly? And here, it's a very different approach to the way you answer these questions. In this first stage, I can figure out everything I need to about your life by just talking to you. Now, I have to talk to you in a certain way. If I come to you and I go, hello, I have an incredible idea. Let me tell you all about it. Already you're bored. You know? It has these features. It's HTML5. There's a native app on both Android and Apple. You're like, please kill me. It has this feature and this feature. It will revolutionize your work. Like, you don't care. What you're thinking when I start my pitch is, what is the most rapid and polite way I can get out of this conversation? So what most people do is they compliment you. They go, oh, it's really cool. It's so innovative. I've never seen anything like that before. Let me know when it launches. And then they run. Like, it's a compliment plus a stalling tactic. And as founders, we're very optimistic. We want to believe that they love what we're doing, right? This is understandable. You love what you're doing. Of course, you hope they'll love it also. But by doing this, by pitching them, essentially you prevent their ability to give you real feedback. And instead, what you do is you get compliments and you get opinions. And neither of those are reliable. It's like how if you meet someone at a bar and you're annoying enough, you can always get a fake phone number. But that's not progress. Similarly, someone saying something nice about your idea is not progress. It's a compliment. It means nothing. It's like the fake phone number of business feedback. You need to find a way to get to real data. And the way you do that is basically, instead of asking their opinion about your idea, you ask for facts about their life. You don't say, hey, what do you think of my idea to solve this problem? You say, hey, the last time you had this problem, how did you solve it? And if they say, I don't know, I just ignored it, it's not that big of a deal, you know you've got some big issues. And they can say that and feel safe saying that because they're not worried about hurting your feelings because you never introduced your idea. You're just asking about their life. So this is the way you deal with the learn stage, right? Don't talk about your idea, just talk about their life. The confirm stage, you've got a product. It's like, hey, do you like this thing? So obviously you've kind of, like it matters. So here what you're doing is two things. You're either showing it to them and asking them for money. Do you like this? Yeah, it's super smart. Do you want to pay me? No. Or you don't ask them for anything. You don't ask them for their opinion. You don't ask them for feedback. You just watch what they do. Hey, here's this product. And then you watch the analytics. If they use it every day, it means something. If they open it for 10 minutes and never come back, it means the opposite. Right? Like if you owned a burger restaurant, you wouldn't run a customer survey to figure out if people prefer cheeseburgers or hamburgers. You would just watch what they buy. Customers' behavior never lies. Their words do. So here it's about talking about their life and conversations. Here it's much more product-oriented, either sales-driven or analytics-driven. And then after that, and only after that, after you know that a few people frickin' love it and can't live without it and are happy to pay you and want to use it every day, you go, okay, now it's time to make this thing bigger. And the biggest mistake, there's like two mistakes. It's the number one killer of scalable startups. It's basically doing the steps in the wrong order because we get too excited and we want to be a big deal too soon. So it's skipping learning about your customer to jump straight to trying to sell them something. And then it's skipping getting a small group of people to love it and trying to grow the thing. Nothing's expensive up until growth. You can do both of these with a team of 2 people. A lot of coffee, that's it. A bit of code. But getting to growth is where you can start spending $1 million a month if you want, quite easily. I don't know if you guys have ever really poured a lot of money down paid acquisition, but hiring a sales team, spending money on Google at scale, Facebook ads at scale, any of these things, so expensive, mind-shatteringly expensive. And you can get as many people as you want to your website, but if someone doesn't love the thing you've built, they arrive to your website, then they disappear. Yeah, it's like it's a great way to waste money. So it's like being patient about these steps and really making sure that you're ready to go to the next, and loving being small. It's like the counterintuitive lesson of scalable startups. Stay small as long as you can. Really nail down the blueprint, then do it when you're ready. And incidentally, this is also where you raise lots of money from investors. It's super frustrating to raise investor money too soon. because investors want you to grow. And if you raise investor money when you're here, they start pressuring you to grow before you're ready, which makes your odds of failure like vastly higher. Anyway, but investors are a totally different topic. So this was the Pez.com guy, and he's like my constant reminder, his cheerful face, that like premature scale is bad. Do not act like a big company before you're ready. It kills you. Be like the wonderful, immortal university students until you need to spend money, and then go get it from someone else and spend it with great confidence, because you know you've proven the idea out. This is kind of a joke graph, but it's also kind of true about the experience of scalable startups. This was drawn one day by an anonymous source on the Y Combinator office wall, which is like an early stage investor. That's where I got my first investment and where I started my startup journey in 2007, I guess. So you start, and the fact that you're new, you've launched, woo! The fact that you're new gets you some press coverage. It's called the TechCrunch of initiation, woo! But usually you haven't yet made the product good enough, so you have no retention. So a bunch of people come and then they all leave. The wearing off of novelty, the trough of sorrow, this is where depression sets in. And then, you're improving things though. You got occasionally the crash of ineptitude, wiggles of false hope as you start to figure stuff out. And then usually somewhere around here, you either figure it out and you're sorted and you start to be one of like the success stories, or you run out of money, which is bad, but whatever. And it's very like emotionally draining, right? Because you get up here, it's like, and this is like, it's like the visual example of why the emotional roller coaster is so unavoidable. It's just like, we're doing it, it's like, it's hard. It takes over your life a bit. But it's also fun, and it gets you into a world of business that's very difficult to access in other ways. Like my first startup was a scalable startup. We were trying to figure out social advertising before Facebook or Twitter succeeded at it, which obviously we didn't. But we had an interesting ride. We ran the business for about 4 years. We raised money from some of the world's best investors. We had clients like Sony and MTV. We were on TV. We were in the newspapers. Like all this really interesting stuff. And I was like 23 at the time. It was fascinating. And it was a set of experiences which, while being fantastically emotionally damaging, I also wouldn't give up. It was so unique and so cool. And typically, like, you just keep raising more money, right? Like, you do some work yourself, then you raise some money, then you raise more money, raise more money, raise more money. And if at any point you can't raise the next bit of money, you just go out of business. It's like you're kind of committed to either keep hitting these milestones or to just shut down. Because your previous investors don't want a small company, you know? That was me with less hair. That was my very first investor and my very first startup pitch. And I was like, please, can I have some money? And it was interesting. There's so many different ways that you can be attractive to an investor, and it depends on the type. We had zero business sense, but we had a really good technical team. I was a programmer. We had a bunch of great programmers, product people. We showed him demos, and I'll never forget what he says. It was only a 10-minute interview. We'd flown across the country for a 10-minute interview, and he goes, oh, this is a terrible idea. It'll never work, and it'll never scale. I was like, oh. It was like 3 minutes into the meeting. I was like, are we done? And he goes, I really like your team. If you can figure out an idea that doesn't suck before the end of the meeting, we'll invest in it. I was like, we've got 7 minutes. And he's like, more like 6. You'd better hurry. And I was like, can you help? And he goes, okay. And so we had a 6-minute brainstorm. And at the end, he goes, I'm in. And I was like, oh. It's very stressful. And then you go through like the normal product development stuff, right? And you're doing the customer stuff I talked about, and then the product stuff. And again, it feels like not a real business to be drawing shit on paper and putting it in front of people. But like, this is the way to do it. Like, you don't need to make everything like a beautiful, high-resolution super mock-up. You're not trying to impress a board of directors. You're trying to figure out, like, are we building the right thing? And how do we figure that out as quickly and as cheaply as possible? Sometimes it's having a conversation with someone and asking them about their life and their problems and their workflow. Other times it might be drawing something on a scrap of paper. In this scrap of paper, this is what it looked like after a client gave us money for it, this was Sony, which was nice of them. And this was like off the back of the Sony deal, we were able to convince investors that we were worth talking to. And this is another thing I want to say about scalable startups. A lot of your work ends up becoming not about the startup, because just the task of always getting more and more money, like, you would like to think you can obsess about your customers and you can obsess about your craft. And if you just like truly love it and make the best thing you can, that's all you have to do. But like, this is 1 day's worth of emails from my lawyer while I was raising money. And this went on for 3 months. Like it was like no one was happy here except for Bradley, who was billing me $450 an hour. He was the only winner in my first startup, I'll tell you that. And it's a certain like fundraising and being committed to the fundraising path. It carries a lot of extra admin with it, right? Like a lot of unnecessary tasks. The money can be very powerful. It can allow you to go after businesses and opportunities and social impact and global scale that's not available otherwise. But there's also a lot of crap that comes with it, like artificial milestones and like putting up with this stuff and all that. Not to mention the personal fragility. Like raising funding is very all or nothing. This was my favorite screenshot of all time. This was like days before someone wired me $1 million. And if you look at my bank balance, in my checking account, I have $1.37. And in my other account, I have negative $46. I was like, I couldn't buy food. It was a really tough time. I would like go to meetups and I like walk in. I'd be like, do you have snacks? I'm super hungry. Take a bowl of pretzels with me when they kick me out. And at the time, we had like a successful business worth many millions of dollars, but I was personally absolutely broke. And I remember like shortly after they sent us the $1 million, I got a call from my bank. This was my personal, obviously the money goes into your company bank account. It's not like they wire it to you personally, but then you can pay yourself and buy food. And my bank goes, hey, you guys have been broke for like 2 years. And I was like, oh yeah, it's been terrible. And they go, someone just sent you $1 million. And I was like, yeah, I'm excited. Can I have it? And they're like, no, we've frozen your account for money laundering suspicions. I was just like, I'm so hungry. So it was like a Friday, so I had to wait until Wednesday or something for them to unlock my money. So it was like all these weird little things. It's like, I don't know, like people talk about the emotional roller coaster of scalable startups, and this is it. Still, like I said, I wouldn't give that up for the world, but on the other hand, I haven't gone back to it. Since then, I've leaned much more toward reliable startups, where instead of relying on these outside investors, you focus more on being customer funded. Can I get customers to pay me? And like this isn't possible for every opportunity. Like you couldn't build Facebook as a bootstrapped business. You couldn't even build Airbnb as a bootstrapped business. The revenue for those types of companies is so far away that like you kind of need to reach a large scale before anyone will pay you. And at first I thought, well, like if I can't do the big ones, why bother? But then later I was like, actually, I don't need that much money, right? So one of my favorite examples, there's this restaurateur in London, and then he moved his family to Barcelona. He opened a London pub in Shoreditch. Then he moved, ran it, made it successful. Good small business, you know? He was like, okay, my family is financially sorted. Then he was like, I'm going to take my family to Barcelona. He opened a great restaurant there. 4 years later, he'd taken a few years off. He'd spent time with his kids. He spent time at home. He traveled. He was like, I'm bored again. I want to do another restaurant. He opened one, spent a couple years with it, made it successful, kicked his lifestyle up a notch, took another 4 years off, had another kid. He's like, I'm bored again. Opened a third one, also successful. Like each one was just a reliable little business that got him to the next stage in his life. No one writes about this stuff in the press because it's not a dramatic story. But it's different. Like one way to think about the scalable startups is Russian roulette. Like obviously someone wins at Russian roulette. But the fact that they did does not make it sound career advice. They're like, yeah, I made a ton of money in 10 minutes. You should try it. You have to understand the game they were playing and the consequences. And by all means, choose it. I did. It was fun. Like, it can be good. But there's other options as well, which are much less fatal. So reliable startups, the main idea criteria is someone will pay you money quickly. That's it. You know? Like, yeah, this is a great idea. People love it. They'll pay us in 6 months. Not going to work. Because you can't fund the business out of your pocket for 6 months. And the fact that it can only get so big that it doesn't have hypergrowth means investors don't want to fund it. And you don't want to take a bank loan because if it happens to not work, they're going to take your house away. Or your dog or whatever else they can take that's valuable to you. So like what you need is early profitability, so you only need to spend like a month before you get paid. You know, like whatever it is. You don't get paid by selling the thing, you get paid by being profitable and taking dividends. This is what I did with my last company, and it was great. There were 4 founders. We worked on it for a couple years. our goals diverged. One guy wanted to settle down, have a family. One guy wanted to get really ambitious and take over the world. I wanted to spend a year on a sailboat and goof around. Like, we had different goals. And so we're like, oh, well, let's just shut down the company. So we shut down the company. We all paid ourselves a bonus of a couple years' salary. And we're like, okay, like, let's all take a couple years off. It wasn't like a big world-changing business, although I think we had a positive impact. It didn't make me rich forever, but it's like, oh, I actually don't have to work for like 5 years, so that's nice. You know, and it like frees me up to pursue other goals. Yeah, anyway. And investors are super toxic for this type of business. The lifestyle can be really hard at first. A lot of people suffer here because it is hard to get any type of business working. And it's hard to get, whether you're building technology or whether you're building a team who can run it without you, it's hard to get something running smoothly enough that you can step back from it. So what you're looking for is kind of a couple years that it takes over your life. And hopefully you protect your personal finances, and then you're like, okay, it works. And then you start focusing on like, who else can I bring in to take, or what technology can I build so that I can step back. The team grows slowly and steadily. And the biggest thing here is if it fails, like, banks will always give you money for this if you put your house on the line, which is like a really terrible idea. Like, there's a reason banks have more money than you. And it's like not because they make generous offers to people. So, you know, it's like, I think part of the trick here, which is really hard to do emotionally, because it feels unfair. We want to believe that like money doesn't matter and that all ideas are available to all people, but money does matter and not all ideas are available. Because different ideas cost different amounts of money to get going. And like, if you don't have much money, then you can only go after ideas of this type that are affordable, like that are within that, or it depends on your skills also. Like, if you're a finance professional and you've never touched a line of software in your life, building an app is going to be really expensive for you because you're going to have to hire programmers. Whereas if you're a programmer, going into the banking industry is going to be really expensive for you because you're going to spend months trying to get a meeting. Like, if you play to your strengths and if you play to the resources you already have available, and I know this is like the least fair thing in the world, and I acknowledge that, but that's how you make it safe, right? You're like, okay, what resources and skills and assets do I have? What can I do with them? And you go, oh, I can do this. This is within my reach. And you do it. Boom. 2 years later, you're now in a better position. Like, so often we think of entrepreneurship as one company, but it's not one company. It's a career. You get to do this one. And after you've done this one, if you've taken care of yourself, you are now in a better place to do the next one. You're more skilled. You're more connected. You're more financially, well, certainly financially capable, but possibly also more wealthy. It's like you build these resources over the course of your career. Like, you wouldn't go into an internship and be like, pretty much sucks that I'm not the CEO. You know, there's like a career path. And some people get super lucky and are able to skip all the way to the final step of entrepreneurship. But again, it's kind of like a Russian roulette result. Yeah, this is what I did. It was fun. Like, we had a great time. We had a team. Everyone was happy. People got married. People bought houses. None of that stuff happened at my first company because we were too busy being miserable and stressed. It's like, what's the goal? The freedom-oriented startups are, you know, lifestyle businesses, being an artist, being a craftsperson, all that stuff. And also location independent. Super interesting. This was a guy, I ran a workshop for him years ago, and, you know, like not unlike this. I was like, hey, here's some ideas. He sent me an email out of the blue 3 years later. He was like, hey, I did what you said, and I retired, and now I live in Portugal. Thanks. I was like, he's like, here's a view from my balcony. And I was like, oh, well, great, you know. And the business he retired on is hilarious. It's a mail order hot sauce subscription. So he's like, some people like hot sauce. They pay me every month, and I send them hot sauce that they can't find other places. I was like, really? You retired on that? And he's like, yeah. And that's not quite true. He diversified into mail subscription grilled cheese sandwiches. He called it cheese posty because, you know, like a toasty sandwich. Anyway, so he's like, yeah, he's like, I made those two businesses, and he ran both of them completely by himself with freelancers. And once he had enough monthly revenue, which wasn't that much because Portugal is a cheap country, he was like, cool, my freelancers run the business now, so I can retire. And I was like, that's pretty cool. That's super inspiring. And it's not that easy. Obviously, I cherry-picked a case study that worked. Like, if it was this easy, like everyone would have done it. But if you set it as a goal, and if you choose a type of idea that's well suited to that, it's like you can get there much faster. Another way I think about this is like the careers of artists and craftspeople. Like this is a photo of Moreau's workshop, the Spanish artist. And it's just so cool to me. It's like he built a bunch of stuff. It's not my computer. I have no idea what's going on. He was just like, how does he like spending his time? He likes spending his time making paintings, And like every artist's career is like a tiny business, or every craftsperson's, and like maybe they have a couple other people managing it and they put those people in place, or maybe there's a bit of a brand. What's their marketing process? Maybe they just use a gallery. Maybe they go direct. Like, I don't know, but for him, like clearly the business wasn't the goal. The goal was he just wanted enough stuff in place so that he didn't need to worry about money and he could keep making art. And you can pursue that sort of thing as well. The freedom startups, like the main criteria is just they enable your goals. So the cafe I think of as the classic trap. I dream of freedom, therefore I will start a cafe. It's like, no. Starting a cafe gives you something, but what it gives you is not freedom. Like it gives you something valuable, right? Super challenging, super meaningful, all of this stuff. It's just like freedom is not it. There are other types of businesses that do it better. Typically, these types of businesses, they're so specific and so niche that the financial rewards are almost nothing. The idea is like instead of getting money and then spending that money on a vacation, you're just like living your vacation every day, so you skip the whole money part. Again, works better for young people because it's kind of difficult to raise a kid on that. But it's a really nice like stepping stone type of business to give yourself a couple years of fun, learn some skills in a safe, low-cost way, and then potentially apply it to either a career or a different type of business elsewhere. Yeah, and people here, when these businesses fail, like they tend to go, I like doing it anyway, I'll just keep going. Like they weren't doing it for the, the returns. And so it pushes you a bit toward like, my biggest mistake, I think, or maybe not mistake, because you got to learn somewhere, but one of the biggest things that's changed in my understanding of startups over the last 10 years is I did not pick my first idea based on an actual goal. Like I picked my first idea because it seemed impressive and I wanted someone to give me money. Like I wanted to be on the, like I didn't know what to do, so I did what I'd seen on TV, right? I did what I saw Steve Jobs doing. I was like, that's what I'll do, I guess. I don't know. And it took me a bunch of years to realize that like the type of idea you pursue and the type of company you build, it has a massive impact on the end result, on your day-to-day lifestyle, on how it feels, on like how long these different types of goals take to reach. I was like, oh yeah, you can just save so much time if you pick the one that is well suited to your goals. And also if you pick one that's easy for you to execute on. Like I used to glamorize hard things. My first business was in the ad industry when I knew nothing about advertising. I didn't know a single person. I'd never owned a suit before. I was like, I bought this horrific tan suit and I started going to ad agency meetings. I was like, hello, I am an entrepreneur. It took me like 2 years to get taken seriously. Which fine, eventually I did. You can learn anything, right? If you were willing to suffer and keep trying. But that was 2 years of non-progress. When I could have spent that 2 years on something I like was more within my reach and like, cool, 2 years later, all right, now I'm like further along. What do I do with this? Maybe I could have gone back to that idea later after I had some more skills, some more connections, all of that. So it's, yeah, I don't know. Like, some ideas are really easy, like why not? Others though are super impactful and sometimes it's worth suffering for. Anyway, whatever. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I just want you to realize that there's a choice and it has all these impacts. So once you've decided like something that you're excited to work on for whatever reason, because of the goal, because of the day-to-day, because of the vision, the impact, whatever it is, it brings you back to this very pragmatic question of how do I get started? And in terms of actually doing the thing, the biggest advice I want to leave you with is to be cautious of jumping too quickly to the product. Take some time to understand your eventual customers. Like slow it down. It costs nothing for you and a friend to talk to some customers and try to really understand what they care about and how their life works. It's the cheapest part of running a business. Like you may as well extend that period since it costs you nothing. You don't even need to quit your job. You can do it on your lunch break. You can do it after work. You can take a couple vacation days. This stage of the business is measured in calendar time rather than clock time. Like setting up a meeting takes weeks, but it doesn't take hours, if you know what I mean. Like being full-time does not help you set meetings up faster. So you may as well start now before you have your expenses going. It's like, hey, let me talk to some people, see what they think. I can't tell you, I told this story earlier today, but it's an example I really love. People ask me, they go, how many startups have you had, Rob? And I'm like, I honestly don't know, because where do you draw the line? Do you draw it at incorporation? Like I incorporated a company? In that case, it's been 4. Do you draw it at like, it was profitable? In that case, it's been like 6. Do you draw it at like raised funding? Then it's been 1. Do you draw it in terms of like products I was excited about that I tested? Then it's been like 50. Because it costs nothing to explore an idea. I had this one idea. It was meant to be to help investors manage their deal flow. Investors get lots of pitches. I was like, I'm going to help you sort that out. How do you figure this out? Well, I called an investor I knew. I said, hey, man, it's been forever since we caught up. Can we get a coffee? Just want to see how things are going. He goes, yeah, okay. So I go in. You know, before a meeting, you often just talk about whatever. You catch up on life. You do this. He's like, how's it going? I was like, man, my email is killing me. Like, it sucks for me. How do you deal with it? He goes, oh, yeah, I got thousands a week. It sucks. And I'm like, thinking, hey, I've really found a big problem here. This is going to be exciting. And obviously investors have money, so surely this is a good customer. And this is kind of the first part of it. Like, if I'd gone in there and pitched my idea to him, then he's going to give me compliments and opinions. But by going in and asking about his life, hey, this is a problem for me. Is this a problem for you? Tell me about it. Suddenly he's telling me the truth, and he goes, oh yeah, it's awful. And I'm like, how do you deal with it? How do you survive? And he goes, oh, well, we get thousands, but we don't look at them. Our like associates, our interns, they look at most of them. They delete them all. We only get 10 or 20 a week, to be honest. There's only a few I like, so I call them. I was like, oh, so how long does that take? He's like, a couple hours. It's like, that sounds okay. And he goes, yeah, now that you mention it, it's pretty good. I was like, oh man, like this thing I thought was a huge problem, by asking like 4 questions about this guy's life and never mentioning my idea, suddenly I realized he doesn't care at all. Now, someone else might care. The poor guy dealing with the 2,000 emails might care. Like there's often a solution, right? But by like, what did that conversation take me? And then he goes, so what did you want to talk about? And I'm like, nothing, trying to choke back tears. But like, I love this. I love the idea. It's like, you could just go and talk to some people and you can explore this stuff. Not everything needs to be incorporated. You don't need business cards. You don't need to do all these things. You just need conversations. And ideally, like keep it as casual and informal as you can. Like you're trying to understand them, right? Understand their frustrations and their pain. You wouldn't go to your friend who broke up and be like, on a scale of 1 to 5, how upset are you? You'd be like, oh, you just got dumped again. That sucks. Tell me about it. Like, what are you going to do? How do you feel? Like, and you kind of want to talk to your customers, at least at the beginning, in the same way. They're like friends you're having a conversation with to try to understand their lives. And the better you understand their life, the more able you are to invent the product that's going to fit into it. Crack. So do that. That was super distracting for me. Yeah, so do that. Like, you don't need any of the official stuff to get started. You just need to like be in touch with your customers and try to figure out like, what do you guys care about? Sometimes you don't even need an idea. You can just be like, man, my granny's getting old. I would love to help my granny and people like my granny. What can I do for old people? Just go and talk to old people. Be like, hey, like, what's the worst part of your life? It'll be a long list. You'll find opportunities. Talk to the people who run nursing homes. Be like, hey, like, what are you most frustrated by in the process of running a nursing home? Talk to busy professionals who have aging parents. Be like, hey, your parents are getting old. Like, what have you tried? Like, what are you doing about it? Like, you don't even need an official idea or a business plan or anything. You just need like someone you want to serve, and you go out and you try to understand their life, and the ideas will come to you. Then you go, oh, I think I can help with that. Oh, okay, cool. How about this? You're onto the confirm stage. Once people are like, yes, I love this, I need it. Okay, now it's easy to raise money. It's really hard to convince someone to give you money. If you're like, I have a great idea, trust me, give me $1 million. That's a super hard pitch to make. Because you're basically claiming, like, I am very smart, give me money. Unless you've already succeeded in a big way, like most people are skeptical about that. But if you can say like, hey, I spotted this opportunity, I was skeptical also, this is what I've done to try to figure out if there's something here. Like, this is what I've heard from customers. So I set up a website and 2,000 people have signed up so far. I know that's not a lot, but like this is what they're saying. This is the feedback we're getting. What's weird is like, although 2,000 is not a lot, they check it every day. They're super active. Like if you could just show them evidence that you were able to gather, like on a small scale, suddenly that tells the story for you. You're not saying believe in me. You're saying like, look, I'm as skeptical as you. I had to convince myself that this was worth my time. Like here's how I believed that this was useful. It's a totally different pitch and it's a totally different approach. It's like the stepping stone approach, not big leap, believe in me. It's like, hey, little stepping stones. Like, I think there's maybe something here. Let me talk to someone. There's something here. Let me prototype it. Boom, boom, boom. That being said, sometimes you reach these places where you can't take little steps anymore. You go, okay, I think they like it. I think I understand their problems. I think I've done everything I can. Now we need to manufacture 10,000 units. Like, there's not a way to like do that in a safer way. Well, actually, yeah, you can go to the Maker Lab. You can make 1 or 5 or whatever, which is probably a good idea. But then the jump from there to a bigger run, it's like, okay, what do we do about this? Or sometimes you're building an app and you're like, wow, people in our test group love it, but this only works if we can reach the mass market. So we need to spend like a year doing marketing and try to get 10,000 people using it, or 100,000 or 200,000. There's not really a way to test if that's going to work other than just doing it. So part of it also is being willing, like test everything you can, be as careful as you can, take little stepping stones, and then when you get to the big leap, it's still going to be risky, it's still going to be scary, but at least you're doing it with all the information you can. You're going, okay, I know everything I can. I'm not doing this totally blind. Do I want to put the next 2 years into this? And then take that risk by all means, It's like entrepreneurship's still always going to be risky and scary. It's just like answer the easy questions first. And hopefully, like talking to customers is one of the most useful ways to answer some of them. So that's more or less what I have to say. So thank you very much. So I don't know what the next step is. I'm not really organized. I guess if anyone has a question or two, I will try my best. And if not, dun, dun, dun. Is someone more in charge than me here? And yeah.
So if you have informal conversations with your potential customers, so how do you report that, or how do you collect your data? Yeah. Because then you don't have like a scale from 1 to 5 or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. You're probably okay. So in my opinion, the more formal you make a conversation, the more biases you introduce. Like if you have a focus group, people know that it's their job to sound smart, so they spend their whole time there trying to sound smart. You ask them a question, they don't necessarily answer with the truth. They answer with like what they think will be clever. Or if you ask people, like, if you run a survey, again, it's this formal process, and it gives you data you can put into a pie chart, but you lose the depth of it. Like if you look at, it almost like reduces your business learning to market research. You can go, okay, it's this $1 billion market, these are the competitors, 8 out of 10 people have this problem. They say the problem is a 7 out of 10. Okay, but like, what does that mean? Like, for me, there's been all these attempts to make entrepreneurship scientific, and I think you can make it more scientific, but I don't think you can make it completely scientific. So what I do is I try to gather reliable data, non-biased data, like good authentic data, some amount of it, put it in myself, put it in my team, but then ultimately we're still kind of making an emotional decision. I've heard people, like smart people, and they go, okay, you do this process and this process, and if it's below an 8.0, you try something else, and if it's above an 8.0, you go with it. Kind of like that's so weird and arbitrary. Like, it could be a 6, but you know what you need to change, and you're like, well, I don't know. So for me, what I try to do to get around some of that is I always take notes. I try to write down exact quotes. I try to write down emotional signals. Like this guy said these words and he was furious. And then I go back to my team and I like recount the play-by-play of the conversation. Okay, I talked to this guy, this is the situation. He said this, he was furious. He said this, he was frustrated. Like he wants to do this, but I don't think he cared that much. He's tried this thing and this thing and this thing, but they're not spending any money on it. And now like everyone's got this kind of understanding of what this data is. And then we go, okay, we now know a little bit more. We can now make our decision as product visionaries or whatever. And I recognize that that's not something a boss or a board of directors would like. Like it's very difficult to justify making decisions on that data because it's not statistically significant and it doesn't feel rigorous. But I'd much rather personally make a decision on a small amount of truthful data than on a big amount of like superficial or biased data. So, and I haven't found a way to get like a statistically rigorous amount of non-biased data, if that makes sense. Plus there's also diminishing returns. You go out like talking to whatever. After a certain number of people, you're like, I've kind of heard it all before. And I'd rather like spend my time building the thing and getting to the next stage than to like talk to umpteen, a bunch more people. But yeah, anyone. It's all dark back there. You guys just need to take the leap and start shouting.
Okay, I'll start. So kind of connected to your answer before. So the problem we are facing right now is how do you get the constant stream of people you can talk to? So we would love to talk to customers or to users, but it takes so much time to get a meeting, to get people to talk to. So did you have any strategies? I don't know.
Yeah, it sucks. Talking to people takes forever. And are you selling to businesses or consumers?
No, it's B2C, but also B2B2C.
Okay, great, both. That allows me to answer both questions. So, so one thought is that you don't actually need to talk to that many people. If you're very confused or you have no idea what you're doing, you might need to talk to lots because you're just like, I'm so out of my league. But once you're kind of like, okay, we figured out the basics, I think of it in terms of a weekly process. So what are the weekly behaviors that I'm going to do every week that's an acceptable number of hours that's going to bring some amount of learning into the team? And sometimes it could be like, the best examples are where you can find something you can do that takes zero time. So for example, if you're already having sales meetings to businesses and your salespeople start by opening their pitch, they go, thank you so much for taking the meeting. How was your day? How are the kids? How was that fishing trip? Anyway, let me show you the product. They jump straight into the pitch. If you just change the behavior so that before the pitch, they ask a few questions about the customer's lives in a careful, non-biased way, and they take that as notes and they feed it back to the team, then you've added no extra time cost, but you have added extra learning. So stuff like that can be a big win. And then in some cases, there's really clever examples. Like a friend's company of mine, Songkick, as their team grew, they weren't able to get everyone on their team to talk to customers anymore. So what they did is on Fridays, they would invite their most active users into the office for a party. And then everyone on the team was just having beers, and their office was filled with happy users. They didn't give them scripts, they didn't tell them what to ask, they didn't do anything like that. They're just like, you're now in contact with the customers. So for the team, it was a perk. They'd hire a band, they'd play music. It was a fun time. And it was like a free way to get exposure. Another example, a buddy's company, they don't like to do customer interviews for all the reasons you mentioned. It takes a lot of time, they don't like commuting, their customers are in different countries. So what they do is they have their developers answer all of the bug reports and support requests. But they never just solve a problem. They always try to get the person on the phone, or at least on chat, and go like, hey, why does this matter to you? What are you doing without it? How would your life with our product change once we build it? They ask a couple extra follow-up questions during the existing support procedures. And that's enough for all of their developers to stay connected to what their customers are feeling and frustrated by and trying. Again, not a formal interview, but it's a way to bring in unbiased customer learning into the company. And I think it's too easy for me to stand here and say, you guys should go talk to 1,000 customers. But frankly, that's impossible. And if you try it, you'll go out of business because you won't get anything else done. What I'm saying is that unbiased customer learning is really valuable and it helps you make better product decisions. It should, in theory, save you time because you figure out what to build and not what not to build. It makes your sales message more effective. It makes your marketing message more effective. But I totally agree. You need to find clever ways to make it cost effective in terms of the time. Something else I like to do, and this is kind of my last suggestion on this, is if you know what you want to learn in advance, you can take a lot more advantage of serendipitous encounters. At this meetup, there's probably people in your customer segment. if you know what you want to learn from them, when you run into one, you can go, oh, you're in that industry. Let me ask you, weird question I know. Like, how do you guys deal with the budgets for this problem? People are like, that is a weird question, but we do this. They'll just tell you. Like 9 times out of 10, they will just answer your question. And often they're like happy that you're not giving them the same meeting garbage. Like, what's your name? What do you do for work? What's your favorite vacation? Like, they're like, wow, you actually asked me a real question. And you're in a conversation. And it doesn't feel like an interview. They don't realize they're having an interview. But for you, you're like, oh, you know, you're getting all your questions answered in a very casual and thus non-biased way. And then you like run in a corner and you write down what they said. Yeah.
Talking about pricing, let's say if you talk with the customer and then you said opinions shouldn't matter so much. So if you ask him, how much would you pay? That's the wrong question to ask, right? Yeah. So how...
Yeah, people are super bad at predicting their future behavior, and they're doubly super bad at predicting what they would pay for something in the future. In some cases, you can get a decent signal by looking at how they're already dealing with the problem. I remember I was once like, we built some software, and I was thinking of it as subscription software. And I was like, I guess this is like $200 a month. You know, it's like, it's good software, $200 a month. That seems fair. I talked to a customer, and I go, hey, how are you dealing with this at the moment? And the guy goes, oh, we've got 6 full-time people working on it. We spend like 120 grand a month. I was like, oh, actually, he didn't say 120 grand. I did the math. I was like, 6 people, overheads of a big company, blah, blah, blah. That's probably 120 grand a month problem. This is $1 million a year problem. And I was about to charge them 2 grand a year. And like, maybe there's a moral obligation because I'm trying to get those 6 people fired, but I'm sure they'll be fine. It's like, I'm just going to replace them, right? And so sometimes you can get a pricing signal like that, like how are they currently dealing with it? Sometimes it's not possible though. And what you do in those cases is you put your finger in the air, you take a guess, and if people pay you, you keep doubling it until they stop paying you. Binary search, man. It's got scientific backing. And you undo the final double, you know? And you'd be surprised. You usually get away with 2 or 3 doubles before people start calling you on it. And like you grandfather in the people you brought in on the lower price. So like they get that price forever and you just double it for future customers. So that works. And I mean, to kind of prove the point, like, okay, so I've got a product. It's going to make you live 10 years longer. It's going to make you, you're going to lose weight. You're going to get laid more. You're going to have less day-to-day pain. Like your whole life's going to get way better. Like, it takes some time, you know, it takes a couple hours a week to like use the product properly, but it's good, it's good. It's a good product, well tested. How much would you pay for this, you know? Live longer, get laid more, be fit, be sexy. Like people are like, I'd pay a lot for like, gosh, thousands, I don't know. Like they're thinking, they're comparing it to plastic surgery. They're like 10 grand, I don't know. You're like, it's the gym, it's, you know, 50 euros a month. They're like, I don't want it, you know? Like, if you talk to people about the values, you're like, it does all these things. What would you pay? They're just terrible. But so in some cases, you just need to try to sell the thing to them. Yep. That's all I got.
What's your plan for the next 10 years?
For me?
Yeah.
I mean, my last business did okay, so I'm like retired now. But it's not like, it's funny because I'm sure a bunch of you guys are way more wealthy than me. It's just, I've arranged my life so that I never need to work again. Because like I spent a bunch of time and energy being like, okay, how do I manage my costs and my income streams and blah, blah, blah. And that was kind of the explicit goal of my last company was financial stability so that I had total freedom over my time. And I got it and I was like, this is great. And then like a month later, I was like, I'm so bored. But it's still cool. So I moved to Barcelona, I bought a sailboat, I spent a year learning to sail, I had fun. And now I'm just, it's like, I feel like it's bought me the space, like my head's above water, so now I can start looking for projects that I'm really excited about and that I'm willing to be very long-term about. Because whereas before I'd be like, I'm super excited about this, but like I'm gonna run out of money. Now it's kind of like, oh, so I found my interests are getting more ambitious now. In a funny way, by being less ambitious for a couple years, I've allowed myself to be more ambitious in the future. But it also means I'm not like rushing into something right now. I'm kind of waiting till I get properly excited and I'm willing to spend 5, 10, 20 years working on, you know, something I'm really super keen on. In the short term, I'm learning ukulele. Yeah.
If you have a prototype, so how many people would you ask? How many users? Because there's this saying like 6 people in qualitative testing find 80% of the problem. Do you have the same experience or?
It depends how right you are. So if your guess was correct, 6 people will verify that you're correct. Like you're like, oh, everyone loves it. They're all trying to buy it. They all want to use it every day. They all think more or less the same thing. Whereas if you're totally wrong, 6 will tell you that you're wrong, but it won't tell you how you're wrong. Because for example, let's say you have a product and you show it to 6 different people, and there's 3 dramatically different opinions, or like clusters of reactions. So like 2 people, 2 people, 2 people. Usually what that means is, well, it could mean a bunch of things. But one of them could be, for example, that you've got multiple different customer segments and you didn't realize they're different. They have different goals, they have different problems, they have different budgets. So this means they're giving you very different feedback. And so you're like, you've done your 6, but really you've only done 2. Because there are only 2 that are in a consistent segment. So you run it like again, you're like, okay, I need to find 6 people like that. 6 is just an arbitrary number, but, and you go, okay. And like, again, you get a bunch of different opinions. You're like, what's going on? Why is this so different? Oh, these people are different from these people. So it can take a while to like understand the different needs and goals of your customer segments. But yeah, once you identify them and you understand them pretty well, you're like, I think you care about this. Let me talk to a few of you. Yep, I was right. That can be very quick. And it's also faster if you're in an industry you have personal experience with, because it gives you much better first guesses. Like if you guys enter an industry you have 0 experience with, your first guesses will be insanely off the mark. And so it takes a lot more conversations then to gradually like move into something that's reasonable. Whereas if you've been working in the industry for 5 years, your first guesses will be pretty good. So it takes a lot fewer iterations. Yeah, all right. So thank you so much for coming. Yeah, and please enjoy.